and welcome to everyone. There's a interesting piece of art that I've put here on the first slide. Some of you, I realize some of you might be viewing this on laptops and some might be just dialing in through a phone. But either which way, we're going to keep this as conversational as possible. So don't worry if you can't see a screen. The topic is how do we reimagine our workplace in the current times? So each of us is experiencing what I call a once in three generations event, which means at one time, three generations are experiencing something which is very disruptive together, which is now being called the COVID-19 pandemic. And now, because we are operating in a very complex and interdependent global economy, this pandemic has created a gridlock for humanity and the way we work. And this crisis is likely to transition into a new normal across lives and livelihoods, which means that the future of work is going to change. The way we work is likely to get significantly impacted and influenced through this crisis, right? However, there are solutions, and like this song that Ed played, fear is probably a bigger factor that prevents us from achieving those solutions. And so if we can find ways to get around that fear, to experiment, it's a beautiful opportunity to experiment for humanity to try out new ways of working. Because people have always been speaking about the future of work and saying it's around the corner. And it's quite possible that it's arrived faster than we expected. So what I'm going to do is, in the spirit of making this an interactive session, I'm going to launch a very quick poll. This is basically to understand from all the participants here, do you think COVID-19 is going to create a new normal for lives and livelihoods, right? So you should be able to see the results. So we got about 72% saying yes for sure. Some who say maybe not really, and about 22% feel it's a bit too early to comment, and that's fine. Great, thanks. That's really a quick dipstick to understand where do we think we collectively are in terms of how we choose to respond to the current scenario and the way we think it's going to pan out. All right, so welcome back. Thanks for participating in that poll. What we'd like to do now is to really get you all into some interactive conversations. So I'm going to be using a feature called breakout rooms. How many of you have used this? I'd like you all to discuss within your teams. So it's the same assignment for everyone, but we expect that there'll be different lenses that each team would look at. We expect that the diversity of this group is going to come up with interesting insights. So we've got about 22 participants, and if I say that each one has about at least 10 to 20 years of experience, we've got anywhere between 300 to 500 years of experience on this group, and that's significant. So imagine if you apply those 500 years or 300 years of experience to answer this, we could come out with some interesting insights, right? So we've chosen a design challenge. This is what we would in design thinking parlance call a design challenge, which is relevant to all of us. Essentially, how will humanity respond to new ways of work, right? And more specifically, what are the most critical steps that organizations need to take in order to reopen post-COVID-19?
Okay, so I guess I'll take some notes. Oh, nice background.
Oh, you're on the bridge. I didn't know you were in town.
That's great.
These guys, they have learned.
Sure.
Sherry, did you know that there's a thing called virtual background in Zoom? So if you don't like the background?
I do, but you have to have a particular Intel processor, and I don't have it.
Ah.
Unfortunately, I've tried.
Okay, so what do you guys think? What are the 3 to 5 things organizations need to think about before they reopen?
I think they need to have a plan. How are we going to ensure that everybody will be safe?
Okay, so a safety plan.
I think they should think about how are we going to reinvent ourselves and not just open and go right back to normal. How do we engage everybody in reinventing? What did we learn when we were closed?
Yeah, I feel, at all these years, we have learned, how to be connected and all. But now the situations are like, being isolated, how you can connect still, with the group or with everyone. So
How to connect when isolated.
yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I think that's good. I just think it's bigger than that. I think it's how we can maximize the lessons we learned when we were in a virtual world. What pieces of the virtual world do we want to keep with us?
Yeah.
Based on.
So, quick thoughts on what was the experience with the new members of each of your teams? How were the conversations? How did it feel?
Yeah, we can go. So our group was Abhi, Trisha, and I. So I think having this conversation with Abhi went back to SSL days. It was really nice having this conversation with. So our group came up with 3 or 4 things that we thought that we should do, as that organizations must do as soon as we get back.
Okay.
One of the things
And
is,
we were quite lucky to have a young person who can look at things differently, Risha.
so our thing, the number one thing that we should, we thought that organizations should do was to go back and meet our stakeholders, to understand what are the new priorities, so that we can go back, strategize, and reprioritize.
Okay.
That's one.
All right.
Then the second thing we thought is, to communicate with employees, teams, whether it's the management, the leadership, team leads, managers, etc. So communicate. The third thing is to build, organizations should now consider building a robust, or rather investing in a robust technology where virtual communication, if that is one of the things that is part of the new normal, then I think organizations should also focus on investing in robust technology for virtual communication. That's the other thing. And
Then re-strategize in the, in the light of the changed customer requirements.
Yeah, we touched on that. Reprioritize and re-strategize after meeting stakeholders. And also, I think another point was, should this lead to another situation in the future like this, like a pandemic or something, and a lot of people being laid off? Maybe organizations can also look at building their cash resources gradually over a period of time in order to look at situations like this, or in situations where they have to really lay off. If push comes to shove, then they also can look at re-employing them elsewhere in other industries or in their network.
Oh, that's a good point.
Yeah, that's great.
That's a good
Great.
point. So we actually, I'll give you a couple things that we came up with. One is that we said that before a reopening, companies need a safety plan for how they're going to bring people back safely without exposing them. And along those lines, that all of these buildings that were shut down so quickly and are not being maintained now, they need to go back in ahead of time and properly clean, sanitize them, and check for the proper maintenance, because most of these corporate buildings have no windows that can be opened or anything like that. And so, if their HVAC systems don't work properly and they turn them on, they could actually be injuring people. And we also said that there needs to be some sort of a plan if corporations open and schools are still closed, because many schools have announced that they are not going to reopen until the next school year. And so what do you do with all these children that now all of a sudden their parents are called back to work? And so what is the plan? Are they going to let them telecommute? How are they going to deal with that? So those are a few additional things that we had.
Rahul, can I go next? This is Rachel.
Yep.
Yeah, so I was with Alana. You can add whenever you think that I've missed out on some points. We discussed a lot of aspects and a couple of things which were very common to both of us is the people aspect. what we felt is there is a lot of emotional component, and that is attached to the entire situation that we are going through today. So we thought about the organizations creating smaller communities, forums where they can express, talk about the situation they're going through. That can start today and continue throughout, even after we reopen. Another point which we thought about, and Kavita had already mentioned, is communicate, communicate, communicate. Yes, there should be a continuous flow of communication on what is happening. Another piece that we thought about, again, is very, very critical to business, is rebuild, reform, and reimagine business. This is something that is, those are the 3 points we thought about.
Yeah, yes. And so if I could just add to that, we wanted to talk about the fact that for companies to let people acknowledge what they're feeling right now, and know and have the conversation start with maybe their teams now before we go in, because there's this understanding that corporations only focus on the need at hand, and the question in people's minds of, once we get back to quote unquote normal, will you forget about me and everything that I'm experiencing, and how will my emotional well-being be taken care of in this process? Mm-hmm. So rather than it coming from the top down, for the smaller teams to start the communication, and also to encourage people to consider new paradigms for the way that things are done, since we can now connect and communicate with each other in a way differently than we have in the past.
That's a really good point, because companies are going to be caught in this very tight, interwoven bind between how do they take care of their people and how do they get back to profitability. And of course, history shows that most corporations put the greatest emphasis on profitability over people. And so this time, the question is, will they actually seek a balance? And I'm not so sure.
Sudha, go ahead.
Thanks.
Yes, Sudha.
I was with Nandini and Kriti. This is Sudha here. So we kind of bucketed into 2 policies and employee expectations. So what we penned down is the safety of employees, which is very important at all the levels, especially the the levels where the awareness is very important. And also, the work from home policy should be a new normal now, and only 50 to 60% of workforce should be allowed to work. This will actually bring down a lot of, the criticality of business, which is important. Then we also thought just how we have these awareness programs like sexual harassment or ethical courses. We should also include the courses which can, alert them when these pandemic situations can be there in companies, especially among the lower levels.
And to add, from a policy point of view, we said maybe the organizations will look at how they, what kind of policies or what they negotiate with insurance companies, their, let's say, travel policies, transport policies, people coming into offices. All of these are policies we really need to look at and, come up with the current scenario and adapt it to current scenarios. And from a safety point of view, as some of you already said, we also thought about how the offices will need to be on an ongoing basis, be desanitized or sanitized, so that maybe within the lobby there is new sanitizing booths put in place, and people probably need to go through that before they enter offices. There might be some outerwear, the kind of clothes that we wear. Maybe we'll have gloves again. So we're seeing, we discussed about a lot of things that could change in our work style itself.
Great, thanks. Sushma, your team? Can't hear you. You're on mute. Yep.
Natalie, would you like to add? Do you want me to start, Sushma?
Yes, please.
Oh, okay. All right. I had Sushma and Tejal in my room with me. It was lovely. And we actually spent more of our time talking about what might change and how people might be thinking about this. So a little bit less time on the business ramifications, but I really liked Sushma's concept of having, no separation between humanity and business, and the notion that, I think you can carry that forward to say employers really need to keep that in mind in the future. And I guess the ad that I would give, and it comes from my cybersecurity and risk management background, is that I think we've done a terrible job in our businesses of preparing for not just pandemic, but really any emergency preparedness. There hasn't been enough time and energy in corporations spent on practicing and testing your plans. And that includes, I love the communicate message from several people here. So I think that was something that we really talked a lot about. And we talked about some of the positive, the upside, that if bandwidth could be extended, lots of bandwidth more readily, if there's more emphasis on that, more emphasis on food security and distribution and logistics around that. People are going to be a lot more comfortable with a cashless society, I think, because I don't know about all of you, but when I'm out in public, I don't use any cash anymore. I don't use my credit card. I'm using my phone to tap near the register. And I don't go to places that don't take that, right? So anyway, it's just an example, but we talked a lot about sort of that side of the ramifications. And Sushma and Tejal, what else would you ladies add?
Women leadership in the workforce.
And women's issues you brought up too, issues that affect women more, right, than others.
Right.
Tejal, anything we missed from your point of view?
Just precaution is worth an ounce of cure.
Yes, excellent.
In this economy, we have to be so careful. We go out, we have to be really careful. We come back to home, by turn, we be a lot more vigilant, and that's all I have to say.
Thank you so much. Rahul, back to you.
Thank you.
I just want to make sure we've covered all the groups. Is there anyone who got left out? No? All right. So I'm going to learn.
Our group is left.
Our group is left, yeah.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Agnia, how could that happen?
Go for it.
Akshat is going to take the lead.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Since I was the youngest, I was asked to note down points verbatim. Hopefully, I got them right. And if I missed a few, please feel free to scoot in, Michael and Auntie. So yeah, the first step we thought of was to identify and make a distinction between critical service lines and WFH friendly service lines, and to have only those who are needed at the brick and mortar office to come and work, and have the rest to work from home. And so we would want a cluster wise re-entry back to the office and not all at once. And the other point would be to come up with a business continuity and a contingency plan. Like someone else mentioned, that we've not done a good job. We've probably not done a good job at having these plans in place for what could be done when a pandemic actually hits us. And also to find a way at a later point in time to have the non-critical staff, the non-critical WFH friendly service lines, to get back to the office, because we would all want everybody to work from the office. But on the other hand, we should also look at possibilities of more work from home and less of work from office, and to look at how we could do away with building more offices, brick and mortar offices, and to possibly work more from home. Yeah, and to structure the leadership circle should address the employee cohort, and to recalibrate and to help employees adjust themselves to the existing work conditions, and perhaps look at a few tweaks in their work style, in their working style, and to basically recalibrate themselves to seamlessly
get back to the, to the new normal, if that's what we should call it. That's all.
Whatever normal might look like.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And maybe we should get rid of the name completely.
The name for what?
Name?
Using the term normal, which
Oh, yeah.
to block us into something, as opposed to it's a growth mindset.
New normal.
Yeah. So it sounds like you really can't take the humanity and humanness out of business and organizations. And I think it sounds like there's an evolution of businesses and humanity that's going to, and so we don't call it the new normal, but we call it the new humanity, which is a part of which business is a part. So great conversations there. I'm curious.
Yeah, Rahul, I wanted to just add a little bit. Is that it's no longer us versus them, in the sense the employer versus the employee. Because in this situation, I think we all, be it the employer or the employee or the owners, everyone suffered. And I think for once, I'm hoping we're all thinking the same way.
And I think the COVID is not the last virus we will see. I'm seeing this becoming part of our way of life going forward. If not this, there would be something coming and hitting us, and we realize how fragile we are. Can't take anything for granted anymore in terms of the the services we have. If you look at the number of people that sit in a wing, that can't happen anymore.
Absolutely.
Great. Thanks for those additional thoughts and insights. So what I'd like to do is I'd like to understand how many of these ideas and next steps are things that you are willing to go back to work, whether you have your own firm or you're part of an organization. But how many of these do you think you're willing to try when you go back to your respective workplaces, which right now is at home? So I'm going to put a quick poll here for all of you to think about and let me know, are you willing to try out some of these ideas discussed as next steps for your organization?
Rahul, while people are doing that, I think an interesting poll would be, do you think corporations would be willing to try these out? Because I think you'll get a different type of answer.
Yeah. In fact, Rahul, while people are continuing to take the poll, I wanted to say that something that came up during the conversations today, I mean, once we were all back from the breakout,
yeah.
Other things that organizations are already discussing, at least I can speak for my organization, they're already discussing almost all of these, barring a couple. So I think that's great news.
That is good news. That actually gives me some hope.
Just like GDPR changed the whole world and how information is shared.
Yeah, GDPR, correct.
Yeah, so it becomes something that will force us to take care of each other. I don't think organizations have a choice. They will have to.
An overwhelming 88% saying yes, they're willing to try what they just discussed. So I love the fact that we are willing to walk the talk. And we've got about a little less than 8 minutes left. There's a little bit of theory behind. So thanks, great conversations. I just want to let you know that this was the Lions part of this session to get these conversations very interactive, insightful for a topic which is very relevant to us. I just want to walk you through some of the stuff that happened at the back end to design this session and some of the concepts that make such sessions more powerful and relevant. So I believe that when you think about redesigning your workplace and reimagining your workplace, you have to think about it through 3 lenses. What is the ecosystem that you're trying to deal with out there? And ecosystems are beyond organizations. So for example, our world of learning and life is an ecosystem of diverse people across geographies, cultures, languages, and organizations. Communities of practice are an ecosystem. The enterprise with its functional silos, its partners, its customers, suppliers, is an ecosystem, right? Now, what makes an ecosystem important? So what makes the fact that all of us here are from different organizations and different walks of life, we had a common denominator 10 years back, we are here, we are still here, is the fact that VUCA is asking people to be more agile, and ecosystems are able to respond much faster than traditional organization structures and hierarchies, right? So that's one thing that makes an ecosystem powerful. One of the characteristics of ecosystems are they're not hierarchies, but they're holarchies. They're basically very flat, and they're self-organizing, and they're very adaptive. So that's the power of an ecosystem. The second, so when you look at the network graph, so most of you had an opportunity to take part in the survey. And what the survey did was it asked you 3 or 4 questions. For those of you who haven't and would still like to take the survey, go back to the Facebook group link, and you can still take part and just add to this graph, and you'll be able to see how it goes. You all answered a few questions in the survey. What I did was I took one question out of that, and I kind of prioritized it to say, what are the United Nations goals, SDG goals, that you are most passionate about? And I gave high weightage to that, and I created teams. So the tool or the platform actually allows you to create teams based on alignment of that common purpose. And so, Ed, to answer one of your questions, why did you and Pris land up in the same team? Because the tool said that you're both equally passionate about some of the common SDG goals. If y'all had very different choices, then you would have probably found yourselves in different groups. Now, that was just one way I chose to set up this team. Those of you who didn't take the survey, I just added you all across the various teams. There were 6 teams, right? So one way to look at an ecosystem is to say, how well knit is it? And you'll find that an ecosystem can be a very loosely coupled network. So it becomes powerful when it actually has a common purpose. And so, for example, this ecosystem today worked on a common assignment and spoke about it, discussed it, shared it, which allowed it to become a little more tightly knit and integrated, right? So the power of ecosystems can be phenomenal. It's, if you look at the survey, it says that right now, out of a potential 331 relationships for the people who took part in the survey, just 33% of the people are really connected to each other. So which means it's like a brain that is operating at 30% capacity. Imagine what you could do if it was at 100% capacity. That's the power of ecosystems, right? So that's the second piece. So ecosystems was first. How do they collaborate is second. And the third piece is about they need a platform to come together on to be able to thrive. And that's where we talk about the concept of platforms. You can go to the next layer, thanks. Platforms are what allow you to come together and exchange ideas and thoughts and actually activate a lot of your vision and help to execute a lot of your ideas and designs. So if you can see this slide, that's great. If you can't, don't worry, but it talks about, there are so many technologies that we use as platforms. There are WhatsApp groups, there are Zoom groups, there's Yammer, which is like a Facebook for organizations. And then you get some more sophisticated applications like Mural, which allows people to collaborate together on common canvases. So there are a lot of technology-enabled platforms out there that can allow ecosystems to be a part of and to thrive, right? So ecosystems, how do they collaborate, and what kind of platforms do they need to come together? So these are 3 things that allow us to redefine the way we work in the current and in the new way work is going to get redefined. Now, I'm going to come to the principles of design thinking. So what does this have to do with design thinking? There are several models of design thinking. I'm sharing the one which is by Stanford, and it has 5 steps. It says that empathy for what a group of people or individuals is going through is very important to be able to help you to choose the right problems to solve. Because there's a danger that you might go about solving the wrong kinds of problems. So put yourself in the shoes of people, try and understand and feel the pain they're going through, and allow that to then lead to insights. Those insights will allow you to redefine the real problems to be solved. So you move from empathy to define the problem, redefine the problem. You then start brainstorming on those problems and coming up with ideas which become solutions. Once you have that, you don't stop there. It's important to start prototyping what the solutions look like. Now, you could use various media or mediums to prototype. You could use Lego to create what a working prototype could look like. You could draw something that's a prototype too. You could, as a UX designer, create a screen and say, this is what an app could look like. That's a prototype too. And then what you do is you go back and you test it with the original users who you're studying and say, hey, this is what I think might solve the problem you're facing. Does it make sense? What works? What doesn't? You take feedback and you put it back and allow it to feed back into the process, which keeps iterating. What you need to keep in mind is this is an extremely rapid prototyping and iterative process. So design thinking is about responding to the VUCA world in a much more agile way. And for this particular session, for empathy, we used a survey which pulled out what you really care about. We then took a problem statement about what should organizations do when they reopen post-COVID. So that was the problem statement that became the basis for conversations. We had you sit and ideate in teams, and then you prototyped it by saying, here are a few steps we believe that can help us. And then you tested it. We did a poll and we said, how many of you are willing to take some of these back to work? And you responded. And then you take some of that feedback and you again put it back into the process and keep churning. So design thinking is one way to help you reimagine your workplace and create sessions like this. So with that, I actually come to the end of the session. If you're interested in some resources that I leaned on for the session, there's a great book by Dave Gray. It's called The Connected Company. I really invite you to read it or browse it. And of course, then there's the platform called collaboration.ai that I used for the survey. Those of you who couldn't participate in the survey, I invite you and encourage you to try it out, simply to see the power of what artificial intelligence can do to create high-performing teams and more intelligent teams. The World Economic Forum uses this platform, and the Young Global Leaders Forum uses this platform. And of course, the most key important thing about these kind of sessions is what kind of quality conversations do you have? What are the conversations worth having? And that's a session for next Wednesday that Sherry is going to talk about. So make sure that when you want to know how to make your conversations more powerful in these kind of sessions, you've got to make it there for the next session on Wednesday. Over to you, Ed.